I want to turn now to Board Chair Fletcher. You're a very busy man. You sit on the board of, it would seem, many different agencies so that offer you, I think, a really unique perspective about the connection between housing affordability and transportation and transit, regionally speaking as well. So I'm very curious about how that's translated into new land use and housing policy in San Diego County.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Erica. And thank you to your whole intergovernmental team. We're really grateful at the local level for all that you do. I'll also note as a county supervisor, we take a measure of pride that our president started his political career on the new county commission, whatever that was called back then, as the equivalent of a county supervisor. And so we appreciate those local roots and really appreciate all you're doing. The efforts you've put into encouraging reforms around exclusionary zoning in the incentive program and grant program for what you're pushing at the federal level is going to help drive this whole conversation in a substantive way. And so we're very grateful. But I do sit at an interesting intersection in that I chair our county board of supervisors. We are the fifth largest county in the United States. I also chair our local transit agency, the Metropolitan Transit System. We operate our bus and trolley and shuttle network. And I'm the Governor Newsom's appointee to the Air Resources Board. And so we have a lot of these things that we have to align. We know that we have to lower greenhouse gas emissions. And even though we're moving to electrify our transportation sector, which is the single largest driver of GHGs, it is not going to happen fast enough to tackle the reality of what we face today with rising sea level that impacts us here in a coastal community. And so we have to lower our vehicle miles traveled. We have to lower our greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that we have to increase the supply of housing. And as Mayor Adler just said, and you know, one of my favorite cities outside of my own in Austin, we've got to reset our mindset. And at least in San Diego County, we don't have huge swaths of available land to do large single family home suburban sprawl. We don't have them. The areas where that land exists are areas that are in high fire prone areas. You can't get insurance. I'm going to tell you, if the insurance industry can't come up with a dollar amount to charge you, there's no dollar amount you can pay for insurance. That's what I call an indicator that it's probably not worth the risk of putting the housing there. It also skyrockets VMT. And so this mindset shift we're having to make back to infill, back to greater density, that is where we run into to some of the problems. And so I think it's a recognition that in California, we care about environmental protections. We care about paying our workers fairly. We don't want to use taxpayer funds to subsidize the construction of housing with workers that have such low wage. We're going to have to subsidize their existence. And we also care about increasing density. And so how you align these things together is what creates that rub. And we're doing a lot of things in California. You're going to hear later from Senator Scott Wiener, who's been leading on state efforts around changing state policies and putting pressure on local governments. And I commend him. Keep pressuring us to do what we have to do, because you get the pressure from the NIMBY side, and we've got to have the pressure on the other side. But we're doing things on auxiliary housing units or granny flats. We're tackling height limits. We've got things we're doing around duplexes and quads and putting those density bonuses are a great thing. Mayor Adler, I think, referred to it's what we call density bonus. As you increase the number of affordable units, you can increase the density on those projects. But we have to have elected officials that have the courage to overcome those 17 folks from a neighborhood who any change is hard. I get it, but we have an obligation. We have to figure out how we can do this in a responsible way. The other thing that we've done somewhat creatively is in the county government setting, we have land use jurisdiction for the unincorporated area, the areas outside of our incorporated cities. And that's where we tend to generally, before I got here, think exclusively about where we put housing. But the unincorporated areas are a challenge to put housing because most of them are more rural. You have VMT issues, you have multiple species conservation plan issues, you have water issues, you have fire danger issues. And so we're going to continue to build housing in the unincorporated where it is appropriate. But we are looking at county-owned land in other jurisdictions. I have multiple projects in my district, which is in the city of San Diego, where we are doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 100% affordable units on county-owned land inside the city of San Diego. It gives us some flexibility around zoning. Because we own the land, we can come in and start doing fair agreements around how much workers get paid and those types of things. So there's opportunities where government can build on their own land. There's a lot of creative things you can do with land trusts and all types of things to really, the cost of the land is one of the biggest barriers. And if government owns it, then that's a public resource. We can invest that appropriately. We're doing the same at my transit agency. And this is where I'll end on this on transit agencies. We as an agency, pre-COVID, we're one of the few transit agencies in America seeing month-over-month ridership increases. We were doing all kinds of creative things to get more people on our buses and trolleys. We're taking shoulders of freeways and creating rapid bus lanes and increasing grade separating our trolley system so it can run more frequently. But we also looked at what land we own adjacent to our transit centers. And we now have almost 20 projects moving where we are building affordable housing adjacent to a transit center, which means you don't need the same parking requirements because you can walk right out your door and get on the trolley. We have greater flexibility around height. And because as an agency, we own the land, we just cut the ribbon on beginning a process, an affordable housing mixed commercial use project on our trolley stop that is being constructed under a project labor agreement with 100% union labor. Because those union workers aren't going to need affordable housing. They're going to be able to buy housing. And so we're tackling both the wages there. Now, where we need more help is I need to create more transit lines. And that is why what you all are pushing at the federal level is so vital. That investment you can send to transit agencies to increase our zero emission buses, to increase our bus lines, to increase rail lines and frequency also is allowing us to increase the availability of housing because now I can put housing adjacent to transit and I can tackle my greenhouse gas goals. I can tackle my vehicle miles traveled goals, and I can tackle constructing more housing. And that is where that federal investment in so much of what you're pushing is so vital. It's not just about building transit and housing. These two things go together. Transportation and housing are one issue, particularly in more urban settings with less of the available land. And so in California, it's going to cost a little bit more. We care a lot about our environment. We care a lot about our workers, but that doesn't mean there aren't things that we can do to drive the construction of more housing in the right place, done the right way. And we're pushing, and we're so grateful for the entire Biden administration. All of the things you're pushing have a direct tie to us on the ground, able to lower greenhouse gas emissions and build housing and take care of our workers. And I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today.
And Chair Fletcher, you already called out the importance of state policy at providing that cover. I'm curious, what piece of advice would you have for other elected officials, planning officials, or other champions of these efforts in other cities? What have you learned? And what wisdom would you want to impart as we close this conversation today?
Yeah, thank you, Erica. Look, I think the big point I would drive is that when you have a problem that you have to do something different, that requires change. Money, rights, land, influence, it is not a continuum, it is a pie. And if you're going to do something different, that means it's going to be fundamentally different than the way it is before. So you can't be so afraid of opposition. You can't be so fearful of opposition that it binds you from doing anything. If what you're doing has no opposition, it is not change. It is a continuation of the status quo. And so whether that means real conversations around what locals should have land use and where they shouldn't if they aren't doing the right things, when it's real conversations about, no, you're not going to dump all of the affordable housing for low-income people of color next to a polluting factory. Like, these are the difficult conversations that we have to get involved in. Look, we're doubling it. It's not just constructing more housing, absolutely construct more housing. But we've got real issues in San Diego with vacancy. I have foreign wealth funds buying entire floors of condo buildings that sit empty forever. The point of zoning and building is pointless if no one buys it. It's a real conversation around how many individual homes should one person have and reap a tax benefit for? Do you need to own 6 homes and get a tax benefit, or at some number do you pay more? Because again, that's a housing unit that was constructed, that's never occupied, is not serving as housing. Real conversations around short-term vacation rentals. We zone for hotels and we zone for housing, but when all the housing become hotels, well, we've got a real regulatory issue and challenge. And then the final point I would just say is a part of this discussion around availability of housing is 100% right, and more housing will impact the cost of that housing. But we can't lose sight of the other side of this, which is we also have to talk about the wages of American workers. Because if we just continue to let workers get misclassified and exploited and their attempts to join a union interfered with, and we say, well, we're going to take all this taxpayer funds to subsidize affordable housing, in some regard, we have to be careful that we're not subsidizing greed. and we're not subsidizing economic inequality. And if we raise the wages of American workers and lower the cost of housing, then we can find a spot where we're actually in a sustainable way getting there. And I am so grateful. What the president's proposing is the single largest investment in our nation's history in transit and affordable housing, and it will do more to help us on the local level with all of these issues than anything else. And we're grateful for the fight you all are in and what you're trying to do. And that partnership is going to be key to us being able to improve the lives for the folks we represent.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher.